We're joined now by Sophie Walker from the Women's Equality Party, which helped to carry out the research, and former Cabinet Minister Anne Widdecombe joins us from Devon. Very good morning to you both. And as we introduced you, you threw up your hands in horror. Does this frustrate you?
Yes, it does. I mean, when I hear women say we haven't reached equality, I can actually remember when it was perfectly lawful for a company to place an advertisement with two rates of pay in the advert, one for men and one for women. These days, that would be utterly unthinkable. I can remember the days when women could be turned down for finance for no other reason than that they were women. When I think how far we've come, and we now have so few grievances left that we whinge about mansplaining. I tell you, if I were explaining something to you, you might call me patronising.
Well, that's an interesting...
Well said, Anne Widdecombe.
And I just want to put that point to Sophie about the advert with two separate salaries. Because actually, Sophie, some people might say, well, at least back in the old days, they were transparent about the fact that men and women earn different salaries for the same job.
I thought that was a very interesting point that Anne raised, that actually, you know, our survey has shown that 20 years after the original survey, women are still not getting answers to these questions. And there is still a 20% pay gap, which is a 20% productivity gap. And despite the fact that the government has said companies need to be showing what they're paying people, it's still not happening.
But there's also a 20% pay gap in many companies between one man and another man, often doing similar jobs, because one man has been more aggressive, perhaps, in going after a better deal for himself. Are women, and I would say the answer to this is yes, from my experience as an employer over the years of many, many women, are women just not as assertive about getting better deals for themselves in the workplace than men?
Now, this came through in the survey as well. There were quite a few women that said, please stop telling us to fix ourselves.
Why?
Please stop telling us to fix the women. The reason that women aren't getting paid the same isn't ultimately because women don't ask right. It's because there's massive structural barriers stopping women from being paid the same. And it's not just about overt sexism in the workplace, it's about the fact that we don't value carers and we don't share care.
Anne's spleen is about to erupt. Anne, what is your response to that?
The pay gap does not mean two people standing side by side, one man, one woman, on a factory line, doing exactly the same job, and the man getting more. The way that the comparability of the pay gap is assessed is taking into account such things as women tend to work more part-time, then trying to take two completely separate jobs and say, well, what are the attributes required, and trying to get some sort of false comparability. And we've come to that point now, from a point in which you really could have two people side by side doing exactly the same thing, lawfully being paid completely different rates.
Well, hang on,
so I don't actually buy into this. Our problem is this. We've actually got equality and we don't know what to do with it. So now we want special favours like positive discrimination. Oh, bless us all.
Well, I'm just trying to think of two people who sit side by side in the workplace, who do commensurate jobs, and whether there is a substantial pay gap between them.
Well, one of the problems, Sophie, is that there isn't transparency about it.
Yeah, there isn't transparency. And also there is a problem that we don't value carers. We assume that women will continue to take the burden of childcare, and we don't share it. We don't pay carers very well. We don't give adequate funding to childcare. Also, the other thing that came through that I'd like to raise, because Anne's on the programme, is the feeling from many of the people who came to the survey that there needs to be more female voices in politics. Men still out...
The Prime Minister's a woman.
Yeah, but
what a time to be making that complaint. The most powerful person in the country is female. The Queen is a woman.
Okay.
And the Prime Minister's a woman.
Let Sophie answer.
Are you done?
Yes. Stop mansplaining or womansplaining.
I think the reason that's come up is because we do have a female Prime Minister, and I've been asked all the time, well, you can go home now, the job's done, we've got a female Prime Minister. And I think a lot of women are responding to that too by saying, actually, men still outnumber women 2 to 1 in the House of Commons. And we have a major problem in terms of women's voices being heard.
But compared to 20...
which I think you're demonstrating remarkably well.
No, I'm just trying to get a point in before we have to finish. There are many, many more women in the House of Commons than there were 20 years ago. Let me go to Anne Widdecombe for a final word here. I mean, the House of Commons is surely a perfect example of where gender equality has been speeding in the right direction now for several decades.
Oh, it's gone way beyond gender equality. We now have women in the House of Commons who've got there through all women shortlists, which is another way of saying exclude the men. And what really I can't understand, Piers, is the way that you men are such wimps while all of this is going on. You don't seem to stand up for yourselves. You don't have equal custody rights. You don't have positive discrimination in your favour, and you just take it.
I couldn't agree more, Anne. I feel completely downtrodden. It's time for us men to beat our chests and to get back and seize control of this country from the women like Theresa May who've taken over.
There's an example of mansplaining.